My name is Matthew Connelly, and I'm the director of the Center for Study of Existential Risk. I was trained as an historian, and so I bring somewhat unusual perspective to this field in that most of the people working in this area mainly work on future risk. But in history, I'm also a little unusual because I actually have spent a lot of time looking at the history of how we try to predict and prepare for catastrophic threats. So, the kinds of things that I've worked on include how it is, for example, population control movement imagined the future and how they tried to change it. I have also written about political violence and revolutions, history of the Cold War and decolonization. And more recently, I've been trying to develop new methods for doing history using data science to try to analyze millions of declassified documents and figure out what it is we might eventually discover, things that are still secret. Well, I read Martin Rees's book, Our Final Hour, and I got interested in how it is that this center had grown up at Cambridge. And so one day I was thinking about starting a new book, a history of how it is that big institutions predict and prepare for catastrophic threats. And I looked up the website of this center in Cambridge, and I was amazed to discover that they actually had an opening. They were looking for a new director. And it sounded exciting, so I just went ahead and applied. And I think I applied on the day before the deadline, or maybe even the day of. I've always been interested in emergencies of various kinds. The first book I wrote, a revised dissertation, it was a history of the Algerian War for Independence. It's a war that some people haven't heard of, but at the time, this was something that for contemporaries it represented a clash of civilizations. Many people felt that militant Islam was on the march and France was trying to defend the West. So this idea of the world in peril is one that I find quite compelling. I mean, it's often completely wrong, but actually it gets important then to understand when in fact we face these catastrophic threats. So from there I went on and I worked on the history of the population control movement. That's an example where some worried about degeneration. They thought that the meek would inherit the earth. So that for me was an example when you look at the tremendous costs, more human than financially even, the great price many millions of people paid because of course of population control programs. It made me realize it's really important, that we're right, in identifying what risks really are existential, so that we can focus our efforts on the things that we really do need to be worried about. We face a lot of challenges, clearly. Some of the things top of mind that our center focuses on include climate change, preparing, trying to prevent the next pandemic. I'm very worried about the prospects of nuclear war. We also do quite a lot of work on AI safety, and a range of other things as well. Some of them quite underrated in terms of the chances of a truly catastrophic event, like a volcano or even a supervolcano. But the thing that really worries me is how it is that because of a loss of social cohesion, and to be honest, because of mistakes that scientists and policymakers have sometimes made, there's a growing mistrust of science, of expertise more generally. This was especially clear during and after the COVID pandemic. And what worries me is that it's made us less ready for everything else that's coming our way. So for me, this is all the more reason why centers like CSER exist and why it is we need to grow and build capacity and help with our colleagues in other universities and around the world, to develop this emerging field and make it as strong as it can be. Well, one thing that makes me hopeful for the future is that when you look at attitudes, public attitudes about the kinds of things that CSER works on, whether we're talking about climate change or AI, what you find is that young people, many of them don't have a lot of hope. That's going to sound strange, but what I'm getting at here is that the people who are most invested, in this idea, that we have to prepare and try to reduce, the risks, the very real risks that we're facing, it's especially young people. So there are a lot of young people who bring a lot of energy into this field, And I feel like that's all to the good because, of course, it's almost a cliche, but it's true. Young people have the most to lose. So I think it's something that gives me energy as well. As old as I am, to see younger people coming along who want to join in this work and try to work together. One thing I would say is I'm a bit of a contrarian in the kinds of projects that I've taken on. I've often kind of gone against the grain, and tried to do something different than from what everyone else was doing. So I would encourage others to do that as well. I mean, it's worked out for me. It doesn't always work out. But at least then when you make mistakes, they're your mistakes. So, in this field, I think we all know that there are particular books that are very frequently cited, and with good reason. So in my case, for example, I mentioned how Martin Rees's book, one of our founders, his book on Our Final Hour, for me was formative. It was really the first time I came to understand, that there was this emerging multidisciplinary field, working to try to understand and mitigate catastrophic and existential risks. But what I would say is read widely, go outside the usual canon, the more frequently cited names, people working in this field, and try to bring in, things that you've learned from other fields as well. I mean, a lot of people are already doing that. It's quite impressive to see so many people, many of them independent scholars, like doing their own work, doing their own research. And I would encourage them to keep doing that. But more even than just reading books, I encourage people, when they're doing research, to try to do research in primary sources as well. And I would say, and this is not surprising in a way, but there's a lot of work to be done in historical archives, because a lot of the threats that we're facing are not entirely unprecedented. Even when it comes to something like AI, some of the best, most interesting new work that's coming out is work people are doing looking at the history of transformative technologies. Like looking, for example, at nuclear power, nuclear weapons, and how it is in the early days of what they call the nuclear era, people were already then trying to think about ways in which they could create new global norms, new institutions, to try to control what seemed like an uncontrollable technology. Now, we all know we still live with this threat of nuclear weapons, but the world would be even more dangerous if the people hadn't done the work. And I think in some ways that can be inspiring, and in other ways, it's a cautionary tale. So I would encourage people when doing their reading, not just to read the books and the articles, but actually in some cases when it's possible, to dig into the archives as well. Look at those primary source documents to see how that history actually happened. So, we do this series at CSER because we want people to meet the researchers, the people who are doing this work at our center in Cambridge. But I'd like to meet new people too. So if you've seen this, if you have some ideas, if you have suggestions for us, if you have projects that you think are worth pursuing, then please come to us with your ideas. We really have an open door, and you should reach out and email us. We're not hard to find. And if you have ideas for how it is we could build new centers like this one and grow this network, then we want to hear about that as well, because we think we're all going to do better as much as we can work together in that way.